Are you looking for a thin and crispy sourdough pizza crust recipe? Well, look no further. This recipe is from Sugar Spun Run, and it's my favorite. I've been using it for months now. My customers love it, my family loves it, and we haven't bought takeout pizza in over 6 months now. The best part is this recipe only uses a few simple ingredients. All you need is active sourdough starter, warm water, olive oil, honey, bread flour, and salt. I've even used different types of flour. I've mixed all purpose with bread flour, and I've used different types of bread flour. But the one I like the most is King Arthur bread flour. I think it turns out the best with the hydration of this recipe. The other nice thing is this is long fermented, so it's gut healthy, and you don't have to worry about all of the additives and preservatives and who knows what else they put in store-bought or takeout pizza. I start by combining the sourdough starter with warm water and mixing that super well so it's nice and incorporated and bubbly. And I add the rest of the ingredients in no particular order, which was just the honey, olive oil, salt, and bread flour. I did double up on my recipe, so I was making 4 pizzas total with this recipe. And one thing I will say is this is a make ahead type recipe. So don't think you're going to have amazing pizza at the end of the day. I really do think it's best if you let it cold proof for 1 to 3 days at a minimum and 5 days at a maximum. But that is what I've noticed gets the best taste and the best pizza crust. After all ingredients are combined and it's mixed into a shaggy ball, you're going to want to cover your dough and let that rest for 1 hour. When you come back, you'll wet your hands, you'll start performing stretch and folds. You'll do those every 30 minutes for 4 sets total. This just builds the elasticity of the dough, it helps strengthen the gluten, and so whenever you go to make your pizza, it should get a nice fluffy rise in the oven compared to a dough that has not been stretched and is weak and the gluten is breaking down. I do find that pizza dough is way more forgiving than bread, so if you forget a set of stretch and folds, if you go an hour in between, if you don't do everything perfectly right, it's going to be completely fine. Like I said, it is way more forgiving than actual bread. So you're going to let that bulk ferment until it is nearly doubled in size. You'll see that it is domed, it's bubbly, it's jiggly, it is pillow-like, and it starts pulling from the sides of the bowl on its own. I forgot to film this part, but this is pizza dough I dumped out for a dough day, and it came cleanly out of the bowl, which is what you're looking for. You'll go ahead and cut these up into 375-gram balls and store those covered in the fridge for 1 to 5 days, depending on how long you want it fermented. I find that 2 days is the sweet spot. On bake day, you'll go ahead and let your dough puff up at room temp for 1 to 2 hours. You'll preheat your oven to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. You'll put your dough on a sprinkled pan that has cornmeal on it and oil, and you'll shape your dough as thin as possible if you want to achieve that nice, thin, and crisp sourdough crust. I'm not a professional, but when it comes to shaping, there's a lot of things that you can do, a lot of different techniques. What I do is I stretch it in the air if it's harder to work with and not as elastic. I hadn't let this dough puff up quite as long as I normally do at room temperature, so it was cold and a little bit harder to work with. So I was stretching it in the air, I was throwing it a little bit, and I was smoothing it out with my fingers on the pan with oiled fingers. I think the key here is really just getting it as thin as possible if you want to get that crispy crust. I was finding that all of the sourdough pizza crust recipes I was using before were a little bit too thick for my taste, and I found that they were a little bit tough and chewy and harder to eat through. This is just so nicely blistered and thin and crisp that it makes it delicious and exactly like what I picture at a brick oven pizzeria or a really nice pizza place that makes their own dough in-house. That's what I think of when I think of this pizza crust. Again, this pizza crust is very forgiving and you don't have to do everything exactly like I do to get it just right. You can mess it up and it would still be delicious, in my opinion, but getting it as thin as possible is the key, and with oiled hands. I then poke holes in the crust with a fork, and I actually bake this on 500 for 9 minutes, sometimes 10, depending on if I'm doing 1 or 2 in the oven at a time. I do that without toppings, which is just a flash bake to get it nice and crispy before I add toppings. I then add my sauce and toppings, and I oil the crust to get it extra crispy, and I'll bake that for another 9 to 10 minutes so it can go ahead and get those toppings cooked. One thing I have noticed is that baking on a metal pan is key to obtaining a crispy crust on the bottom. I have also baked on a pizza stone and it was not crispy at all. It took way longer to cook, and although the bottom didn't brown up at all, I just felt like it didn't add anything to the pizza, and I preferred the metal pan over that. So if you have a baking steel or nonstick pans or metal pans, that's what I would use and recommend. Our pizza just came out of the oven. We're going to do a taste test to see how good we did. That crunch. What do you think?
10.
There's always a 10 out of 10. I feel like you can't really go wrong with sourdough pizza. As always, thank you for watching. If you like this content, like and subscribe, and comment what you want us to make next.
Remember the video that we did the same day?
Mm-hmm.
That was the same day that we're doing it.
We did 2 videos in one day. We did focaccia and pizza. Look at us. We're really good at this, aren't we?